As- Hi, everyone. It's Maya May with Punching Up and Lincoln Square Media, and I am here with Zahra Amanpour. Zahra has been fighting for women's rights literally your entire life. You were born in Tehran during the Iranian Revolution, and right now we are seeing women's rights being eradicated, taken away, it seems, on the daily. And so I think it's important that we're in conversation today to talk about your story and what you're witnessing now in Iran, but also here in the United States. So welcome to Lincoln Square Media.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
I'm glad that you're here. So you're born in Tehran. A lot of people don't really have a true understanding of what life was like in Iran before the revolution. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I don't remember it. It would be secondhand, but I have in my entire life heard the stories from everyone, from my parents, my aunties, my uncles. My husband's parents happened to be in Iran during that era, even though they're not Iranian themselves. So everyone speaks about this beautiful place where people. It was just this up and coming society. The culture was so allowed to be so rich. The sort of traditions that everyone participated in, the welcomeness of the country itself to anyone who wanted to visit and be part of it. Those were these things that people cherished, and to this day are the memories that they hold on to from Iran, and sadly have not seen since.
So in your story, because you've been very vocal and outspoken about fighting for rights right now as we speak, can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. So I'm actually half American. My mom's American. My father was Iranian. My father was killed by the regime when I was 8 years old. But they were living in Iran. They had my older sister there. Well, let me start with, they were like people that went to Berkeley, decided my father was Iranian, took my mother back. My mother fell so in love with the country that she learned the language, stayed, and ended up having my older sister and I there. And, in the late 70s, obviously, the revolution started to really gain momentum. I was born during the height of the revolution in 1979, where it's really where the tides turned. The Shah fell, and the Iranian regime came. The current regime, the mullahs, as we call them, came to power, and my parents were wrapped into that. Everyone was in some shape or form, but unfortunately, there was so much good energy, and there were so many good movements and such good resistance happening at the time. But there was a power vacuum because so many people were imprisoned, and those who were leading those movements and resistance were not allowed to speak at the time. And so the Iranian regime was able to come to power and do what it did. And it very quickly put its grip on society, especially on women. One of the things that it has done for 45 years, if you can hold half the society down the way that they have by really working it into the integral parts of their ideology, then it's not you've kind of done the job for yourself at that point, and that's what they've been able to accomplish. So my family got wrapped into that and came to know the MEK, the Mujahideen of Iran, which to this day stands as the resistance movement and is a women-led movement against the Iranian regime.
Backing up, because what you're describing sounds very familiar with what we are starting to experience here in the US, that political violence, the repression, the feeling that one cannot speak up. Can you talk about how you're feeling when you're seeing this happening here in the US, where supposedly we're supposed to be free?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the parallels are terrifying, to be honest, in terms of just the issue of bodily autonomy, right? In terms of women's rights, what has been happening in the last several years, where more and more we're finding that our reproductive rights, our rights in terms of choice, are being taken away from us. That is sort of one of the fundamentals of fundamentalism in the Islamic fundamentalist regime. When you start to tell women what they can wear, what they can do with their bodies, what their role is. Right now we're seeing this sort of undercurrent in America about like women should be at home and they should be raising families and having kids, and no problem with that if that's what a woman wants. But there's just this sort of shift in conversation that we're sort of the undercurrent of what's being said right now in America. That's what the regime of Iran has sort of based its entire ideology on, and has really been the cornerstone of how it's held a grip on the Iranian society for 45 years. So, yeah, it's terrifying to see it. As a woman here, as a mother of a daughter, I really am, afraid of what I'm offering my daughter as she gets older. And I think we have a naiveness into sort of what does it mean to be free as a woman. And I think in Iran, we don't, that's not a luxury, obviously, and I think we have to, as Americans, really understand that it's not about like, can you do like clothes should come on, clothes should come off. You should be able to do one thing or the other. It's about having the right to choose whatever you want. And that's what I think is being stripped away here. And that's what has happened and really been at the center of what's happened in Iran.
And you spoke about resistance. Can you talk about what that resistance looks like?
Sure. So the women of Iran have always been part of the resistance, and in any context over actually the last 150 years when you look back at it. But what has happened, and with this regime in particular, there's sort of so many contradictions, and people don't realize this about Iran. They assume that because it's in a fundamentalist regime that the women are uneducated. Women have more advanced degrees in Iran than men do, right? And so there's these contradictions that have, despite what has happened in terms of bodily autonomy and all of that, women have been very active in college campuses, in sort of the conversations that have been behind the resistance from the very beginning in the 1970s. And so the MEK, the Mujahideen of Iran, they were, as I said, are the main resistance group that has stood against the regime for this whole time. Women from the very beginning were part of that movement. And in the 1970s, they started to rise in the movement and really take on leadership roles. And in the 1980s, they took on a very deliberate leadership role in the sense that they made a choice that if we're going to fight an entity that its main premise is to hold women down, then women should be at the top of the movement and be the leaders of the movement that is going to fight against that. And that's how you flip it, right? There's no reforming it. There's no kind of being sort of in the gray area. You really have to go that strong with it and have women at the helm of the resistance for that to work. And the woman that rose within the resistance was Mariam Rajavi, is her name. She's I don't even know. She has been my hero my entire life. She is such an eloquent, strong woman, and has really led so many Iranian women to this path of really knowing their own power and understanding that. And we've seen that recently when Americans finally saw the 2022, the uprisings, and the role that women were having on the streets, right? She has inspired so many women in across Iran, and certainly my entire life, someone that I've been looking up to.
Now, is it a unified movement where all women are coming together, or is it similar to here where you have women who are very much complicit in the oppression of other women?
Of course, in Iran, there are women very much complicit and part of it, and that's part of what people sometimes say, well, it couldn't be bad if women are in there. It couldn't be they can't be really coming after us, right? But actually, a lot of times in fundamentalism, different forms of it, it's the women who they make the enforcers, right? So it's almost like you're so preoccupied, right? You see this in all kinds of sort of barbaric practices. It's the women who are actually seeing it through. And if they're preoccupied with like, my job is to make sure I keep other women in check, right? Then they are not part of the bigger conversation, the bigger sort of picture, and that becomes sort of the essence of it. So yeah, absolutely. There are women who participate. However, what's interesting about the resistance is that they actually have formed a parliament outside of Iran that represents different groups from within Iran. So not all of them, and it's called the National Council Resistance of Iran. And Mariam Rajavi is actually at the helm of that. And they have designated her. They had an election with all different sort of ethnic groups are represented on it. Different types of beliefs about what women's roles are represented on it. Different religions are represented on it. Iran has a lot of different sort of complexities like that you have to acknowledge. They decided that they would, when the regime falls, which we all do this every single day for that, when the regime falls, when the Iranian people topple the regime of Iran, let me put it that way, that she would serve as the 6-month interim president to kind of hold the country together until we have a free election. So this NCRI is represented from all different, as I said, groups, and that they've put her sort of as that president-elect for a 6-month term. So that's sort of kind of how they've planned it out, and what they intend to do. And then we could hopefully have, God willing, a free election in Iran for the first time and really see something good happen. And hopefully women would be at the top of that.
I love to hear that, especially the part about the coalition building, because that is something that we struggle with here in the US, is building coalitions with people that may not be like-minded about everything, but at least we do have that one thing in common, that we would like to respect the rights of the individual, whether they be women or men or anywhere on the spectrum. Do you see any of that coming to play here? And what advice do you have for women here who are trying to build these movements?
I think we all have to take a step back and ask ourselves, how did we get here? Right? How are we in this place where we are so polarized and cannot find a way forward together? And I genuinely don't think that's because half of America are bad people, right? Like that's not what, we know that's not true. I've so many times I've actually driven across America and been reminded of the fact that we just live in such different realities that we don't see each other. We don't have empathy for one another. And that's really what we've lost, I think, as a society. I think it's absolutely, I myself lean left, right, personally. But I also sort of disagree with a lot of what the Democratic Party is doing, what the Republican Party is doing, a lot of what the Republican Party is doing. But if we can't find common ground in some way, and I think it's not the common ground that like the bipartisan, what we're seeing happening in DC right now, like like meaningless bipartisanship, but real like empathy for one another, and sort of like build a coalition from there of like, what are the common values that we have as a country and what we want our future to look like. I don't think, we're going to be able to come together and recover from what's going on right now. And we're losing our chance. It's getting worse and worse. And so many things are being eroded right now that if we don't pick this up and realize to have some sort of understanding of people's perspectives in the middle of America, and they have to do the same for us, then we're gonna lose what we've had, the freedom that we have.
Well, and those are the stakes, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I think a lot of people are still in that disbelief where it can't happen here. It can't happen here. Do you know from a sense, I know you didn't live it, but in Iran, was there also a sense of it couldn't happen here?
Yeah. I mean, my mom didn't leave. She's, that story, I forget who, not the one with that Ben Affleck did in Iran, but it was talking about the height of the revolution. It's like in the 90s.
Okay.
Forget the name. Anyway, there was like 5 Americans left in Tehran at that time when it was toppling. And my mom was one of those people, because so many people were like, no, this could never, it's not going to be that bad. The people are rising. The things that the people are asking for will happen, but it was too late. And by the time they realized that the regime had taken hold of the country, they had lost those freedoms. And so many of the good people had been in prison and persecuted the way, we're starting to see that here, right? So much of that had happened that, by the time people sort of said, no, we've got to take this really seriously, we're about to lose our own society. It was too late. And the regime already had its grips on the society. So absolutely. I mean, it is very dangerous to not take this seriously. It's very, what can happen happens fast when it does happen. And that, I think, is something that we can't take for granted as Americans, and sort of the freedoms that we have.
Do you find that when you have that conversation with people here in the US that it's starting to resonate in the sense that, oh, it actually can happen here and help? What do we do? Or are you finding people here still not taking it seriously enough?
Yes and no. I think some people are taking it very seriously. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of people who are doing a lot of amazing things right now and really putting their neck out there to make this, try to fight for our country. And I think that's a very noble thing to be doing. And I respect that. And a lot of our young people are doing that on college campuses, etc. So I do think there's that momentum. However, I think the vast majority, especially my circles happen to be more sort of the democratic circles of
Mhm.
this country, are still pointing the finger and blaming
Mm.
instead of saying, what is my responsibility right now and what
Mhm.
should I be doing right now, rather than trying to just say, how could they do this to us?
Mhm.
We're past that, you know. So I think we definitely, and that's still, unfortunately, I think, a large number of people that are in, have that mentality, and are not willing to what we all have to, I think, come to terms is we're going to have to change the way we are a bit, and have some real deep self-reflection for us to be able to sort of move forward.
And yet I find that things are so chaotic and so busy all of the time in the US, and especially if someone's a mom, a working mom, trying to have time and make space for that reflection is very difficult. Are there any parallels with what was happening in Iran at the time, where there was economic chaos and making it difficult for people to focus and reflect?
The disparity, I think the disparities are something that allow for these kinds of vacuums, these power vacuums to happen when people are consumed with the fact that they're, and to be fair, that can also, if it gets pushed enough, can also lead to really great things because that gives people courage. But when things just aren't right, people get distracted with like the day to day, and sort of the exhaustion of the emotions that we're all dealing with on a regular basis. And I think, Iranians to this day are still, they're the my parents' generation. There's a lot of people that are still like, I don't want to talk about that because it's exhausting, and there's no point. Look what happened, right? And I think that exactly that is what leads to people to be able to sort of take advantage of it and get themselves into the positions that they do.
Yeah, that disengagement and disillusionment that we all want to feel. I always say I try to take a break. I can be disillusioned for a day, and that's what I'll give myself, one
Yeah,
day a week where I can be like, "What are we gonna do? I can't talk about it anymore."
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
so this is a movement in Iran that has sustained itself though
yeah.
over decades, and I think I hope that we're not in for that kind of long haul here. But can you talk about what it takes to sustain a movement over time?
Yeah, a lot of sacrifice, sadly, in Iran, and in this way, it's different. America is in a different opportunity right now and a different circumstance. But, the Mujahideen have lost literally hundreds of thousands of people, in their cause, and have sacrificed not just their lives in terms of what's happened in Iran and the executions that are still happening in Iran every day, but also in the sense that those who have been able to stick with this have had to commit their life to this because so few of them um, were willing to do that in the way that it needed to be done.
Mhm.
And they strongly believe that it's a tipping point, right? You just have to get to that tipping point. And so many times over the last 45 years, that tipping point has come. And I think in America, we have felt that similarly, in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement,
Mhm.
and where we're like, oh, is this like this amazing energy, this amazing momentum? Iran has had, again, very different circumstance, but you get to that point and you're like, could this be it?
Mhm.
Right? That shifts it. And so they believe that if they are focused on what they want, which is freedom, democracy in Iran, and really lifting this oppression from the women of Iran, that eventually that will tip. And like in 2022, what we saw on TV here watching in
Mhm.
Iran, well, I shouldn't even say TV, what we saw on our phones literally happening in Iran. That was one of those really amazing moments where people came to the streets and rose and were like, I've had enough, right?
Mhm.
It's enough. And this can't be the case anymore. And obviously Mahsa Amini's story inspired
Mhm.
people, right? So I think that that's what it's taken, is extreme. My family has, my entire, like how you introduced me, has been dedicated to this. And you just have to keep saying what needs to happen. And I think for Americans to understand, I think it's really important. Iranians are not looking for Americans to come in and have like what's being talked about now. It's either give up the program or we're going to come in.
Mhm.
That's not. We just want to be given the ability to do this on our own and
Mhm.
really topple that regime. So and what that's going to take is extreme focus. Continue to be focused on what is important, which is that it has to come from the Iranian people. It can't come from anywhere else. They are the ones that have to do it.
Well, yeah, and similarly here, we're the ones who have to do it.
Yeah.
What would you like to see happen here over the coming months, years? I have to say, unfortunately, but what would you like to see happen in order to protect our rights?
I think we're kind of in a daze. And
Mm.
I think we need to come out of a daze. I think we've lost, as Americans. I don't this our sense of pride in each other and ourselves, in terms of like what we should expect of one another, what we should expect of ourselves each day. Like I live in the New York area, and I get on the train, and honestly, and I'm not like one of these like older people that are like, what's wrong with our young people? I've lived here for 25. I've lived here for 25 years. I love New York. Like this, I love the culture here. And I'm all about like just get it done, get to where you need to go. But there's this like days that people are walking just oblivious, and I think it's their way of protecting themselves
Mhm.
from letting it in.
Mhm.
But I think we have to wake up. I think we have to wake up. I think we have to engage. I think when we do engage, I think we have to be back in front of each other's faces and talking and having interesting conversations.
Mhm.
I think when we do that, we feel good. That dullness that has been
Mhm.
sort of taken over because we just are so scared of what it could do to us. I think we have to be a little vulnerable, let the emotions in, but try to surround ourselves in a way with other good people,
Mhm.
to sort of build that great energy, because then I think we'll do amazing things. Every time I've seen this country overcome something, get through something, whether it was 9/11, whether it was COVID, whether it was, and then the sort of the protests that I've been part of over the years, it's that we kind of stop for a moment and allow each other to see each other as human beings. And I think Americans, we need to put the phones down. We need to start to sort of look at each other's eyes again and see each other again in that way. And I think that will naturally find that common ground that we were talking about earlier, and hopefully move us in a better direction.
Yeah, I was in Portugal when the power went out, and so no one had phones, nothing was working, and everybody just connected with each other, and it was a beautiful thing. And so I love what you're saying. We basically need to do two things right now, which is what Cher said in Moonstruck: snap out of it.
Yeah.
We gotta
Yeah.
snap out of it.
Yeah.
And then we have to connect with each other in community. And I think there is a consensus now, a growing consensus, that community is what does need to come back in order
Yeah.
for us to move forward. And so hopefully things won't get too much worse before they get better. But I know that getting better, that you are definitely a part of that movement. So I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and glad that you were able to come here and share with our audience what we're doing, what you're doing. Can you tell us where we can find you? And
Oh, that's yes. You can find me. Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. Honestly, I'm not a big social media person, but LinkedIn I am active on. That's where I'm most active on. So if you just search Zahra Amanpour, I'm the only one I know of, and it will come up. I'm in the New York area, and it will come up.
Well, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Look her up, add her on LinkedIn. Hopefully you'll get a ton of requests and maybe some more coalition building here and community building. So thank you for joining us, Zahra.
Thank you for letting me share my story.
All right,
Lovely
thanks.
to meet you. Bye.
Bye.